My name is Jesse. This session is 5 steps to photorealistic. We'll be using SolidWorks Visualize, of course, for this session. I really only have one goal, or I only had one goal in setting up this presentation, and that was to kind of put a method to things. This presentation won't be super heavy on the actual picks and clicks of getting things accomplished, and that's because I kind of developed this out of a bunch of conversations that I've had with people over the years, and I found that it wasn't so much that people didn't know where to click to find the options to adjust, they just didn't really know what to do with them in many cases. So I tried to kind of gear this presentation towards more of what to do with the options, more so than where the options are. If you do have any questions with picks and clicks as far as where things are in the interface or anything like that, you can let me know or you can talk to me afterwards. But that was kind of my concept around this presentation, was to try to give more of my mindset, my method, what I'm thinking about, what I think the critical things are to look for and to adjust when you're setting up a rendering to try to get the best results that you can in the quickest time that you can do it. Has everybody used Visualize in the room? Just show of hands. At least most of you. Okay, cool. That's a great start. So real quick, just about me. Again, my name is Jesse Sprague. I'm a lead applications engineer / whatever at CAD Dimensions. Kind of wear a bunch of different hats, do a bunch of different things. But my background is I went to school for mechanical engineering. I have self-diagnosed hobby ADD, which pretty much just means that I like everything. I don't have money for anything, and I've got too much junk in my house. But other than that, picture of me at the top. It's not to scale. I'm basically the size of a normal human, as you can see. I have a handful of examples that we'll be using for this session. A couple of them I stole off of GrabCAD, so I'll mention those real quick. This is one that I use probably the most. I did this example a few years back, so you may have seen it floating around the web. Is Hans here by chance? No? Okay, good. So I made this model. I grabbed this model off of GrabCAD, and I had to make some changes to it. I think the text was broken and a few other things, made some changes. So we're 2 minutes into this presentation. Tip from Uncle Jesse, when you're setting up renderings, check your spelling first. I did this exercise. I had to fix some stuff on the model, and I messed with the text. And when I messed with the text, I apparently messed with too many things because I misspelled something, and I made a bunch of renderings and made a bunch of content, made a bunch of examples, put it all on the internet, and Hans, the guy who made the model, he commented on it. He's like, "Hey, these look great, but you spelled summicron wrong. There's an A in there." And I thought, that's really not a great time to realize that you've made a misspelling in the model when you've done all of the exercises. And so anyway, it's spelled wrong, and it's been spelled wrong on the internet, and I've looked like an idiot ever since. So check your spelling first and foremost. So that's one of the examples that we're going to be taking a look at. The other example that I had was this Lego model. You may have seen this floating around. I did some examples with this as well. The other example that I had in this presentation I made myself, but those two in particular I have borrowed. So again, this session's really, my main goal is to try to help you not feel like you're buried in options. There are a lot of dials and switches in Visualize. If you've gone in there not really knowing what you're doing, it can kind of feel like you're sort of stuck, buried, hip. And my goal is to kind of try to filter those out a little bit so that I can kind of show you where the critical things are that I look for, or at least the minimum things that you would want to be looking for. So try to get across what I'm thinking about, what I'm looking for when I'm setting up a rendering. Gosh, this is going to be annoying, isn't it? Let's try this. Oops. All right, so when I was setting up this presentation, don't write this down yet. When I was setting up this presentation, I kind of went through my thought process, and I was like, okay, well, I kind of start to plan things out, lay the process out. I set up my appearances, and then I kind of take a moment to stop and notice, like, where do I need to make some adjustments? Maybe where do things look flat, so I can set up the illumination, and then I set up the camera. And when I was going through that, I realized that that spelled panic, and I was like, that's kind of counterproductive to the point that I'm trying to get across here. So Jesse says, just keep a cool head and panic, and you'll be just fine. Not really what I was aiming for. So I kind of thought that through again, and my actual process is something more like this. I do start with a planning period, at least if I'm going to do more than a couple of renderings real quick, and then I move on to applying appearances. From there, I set up my scenes and lighting, set up my camera settings fourth, and from there go to the output settings. So that is really the process that I do usually take, and usually in that order as well. So we'll be walking through that process in that order as we go through this here. So I'll just toss those off to the right-hand side so you can kind of keep an eye on those as we go through the process here. So the first step in the process is to plan. This one is kind of an underrated or underutilized step in the process, I think. If you're just doing one image or something, maybe you don't need to go super heavy in depth, but if you are doing some renderings for a particular project or something like that, I think this is a good thing to at least just take a moment and do. Jeepers. Apparently, neither of these computers are going to work for me. Maybe it's my clicker. Sorry about this, guys. I also apologize for my voice. I have a bit of a cold. I wasn't planning on looking and sounding like a Muppet, but here we are. So I do think that this is an important step if we have more than just a brief project to work on. So the planning stage I break down into three kind of steps. I like to find reference images to begin with. These might not be unique to every project. They could be pretty similar across them, but I do like having this step in place because it gives me something to run back and look at and say, okay, this is kind of what I'm trying to do. That image that I had with the lenses side by side, one of those was a photo that I found on Google. The other one was a rendering that I was kind of just using as reference. So it's nice to have something there just for lighting or for reference that you can look at. Secondly, setting up a folder structure does help quite a bit, especially if you've got more than one image that you're working on. I usually end up with a bunch of different files as I'm going through this process. So having a set folder structure, I just have one kind of default that I just copy a set of folders to a new project, and then I just rename them. And then figuring out what the project is actually going to look like is a good thing to think about. So first, collect some reference images. This could be, take any shape, and like I said, you could just copy them from one set or the other, but I just go on to Google, go on to Pinterest, find some product photography, product renderings, things like that you like, and that look like what you want your project to look like as well. This is really helpful because you can kind of look at things that other professionals have done and say, I really like the lighting on this or that, or I like the reflection, or I like how the camera is set up in this shot, or just some little things for inspiration. I find that, especially if you're not a professional full-time renderer or a photographer or something like that, we don't always have those things like right at the top of our head as to what exactly it is we want or need to do. So just running through some images on the web can be a real great way to just kind of copy that angle or do something like that you can improve your renderings very quickly by just looking at some other reference. So a quick step there, but definitely a helpful one. Now, as far as folder structure goes, this may or may not be super important, but it's worth mentioning. Usually my folder structure looks something like this, which is not often very helpful. So if you have multiple files involved in one project, I try to lay things out something like this, where I can sort of keep track of everything and don't have to go rifling through all my files to try to find things. So at the top level, I have just a folder for whatever the project is that I'm working on. And then I have usually 3 subfolders. On the far right, you can see the project, files, folder, this is where I store all of the files that go along with the rendering process, right? So like your visualize project file, if you end up saving out any of your appearances for purposes that you want to store them, maybe if you have any HDR files, any decals that you might be using in there, throw those all into one file. So you have all of your resources basically in one location, and it's not on the top level of your folder. So those files just kind of end up cluttering things up in your folder. So I put those all in one place so they're kind of out of the way, and I always know where to look for them. And then I usually have a subfolder for the raw renderings themselves. So these are going to be the output. That'll be just a blank folder until we're done with the whole process. So I put that there, and then if you do any final edits after that, I put another folder in there for that, just so I can keep things separated. So I have directly what came out of Visualize in a folder, and then if you go in editing anything in Lightroom or Photoshop or whatever after that, I have final edits that I just kind of keep those separated. So that's usually what I do, just kind of a simple basic thing, but it will speed things up as you do more projects that way. Now, as far as project definition, these are the kind of things that I typically think about. So just how many images are you going to need? That's a nice thing to think about ahead of time, because if you are using Visualize Professional or something like that, you can set up your cameras accordingly. Just a nice little like mental checklist thing. How many configurations? Again, that kind of plays into the opposite of cameras, but how many colors might you need? Again, that's sort of a setup thing. How do you want the image just to feel? That might play into the images that you grab as reference, right? You're finding those images that look kind of like the things that you want yours to look like. What are the purposes of the images? This is just kind of a mental prep for what your output is going to be. This lends itself more so in what the size of your camera aspect ratio and things like that will be, and what resolution, just to keep an eye on what your screen resolution is versus what the final output resolution is going to be. All right, so those are the kind of things that I think about. So the second step is really the first step in actually getting going, right? So that is to apply some appearances. Appearances breaks down into 3 categories as well. And really the reason this gets broken down is because we need to choose an approach. So there's 3 approaches to applying appearances. As far as I'm concerned, you can apply them all in Visualize. So basically you would bring your model in with no appearances, and then you would go to town applying appearances in Visualize. You could apply them all in SolidWorks and just carry those into Visualize and hit go. Or you could use a hybrid approach. And by hybrid approach, I mean sort of this. So apply your appearances in SolidWorks and then use those appearances as placeholders in when you get into Visualize. I'm going to focus on this third one because this is the approach that I use pretty much 100% of the time. There is a place for apply in SolidWorks and just hit go, but I'm going to argue against that here. But so I'm going to focus on this last one, and that is to use SolidWorks to apply the appearances and then take those applied appearances in SolidWorks and work with those in Visualize. So I actually do this in a way that most people probably don't. But I think it's a very helpful approach. So the reason why we need to even think about choosing an approach for how we apply our appearances, really the process is the same no matter how we do it. They're all drag and drop appearances, right? If you've used appearances in Visualize or in SolidWorks, they're all drag and drop. So the reason why we want to make a decision on that is when Visualize imports geometry from, in our case, SolidWorks, we have some options, and you've probably seen this when you import things, as to how we want to group things when it comes into Visualize. And this is actually a pretty important step in choosing how we want, what behavior we want, and what level of control we want when we get into Visualize. This list is kind of overwhelming though, so there's a lot of options in there, and a lot of them don't apply to us as SolidWorks users. So if we boil this down to the ones that really apply to us as SolidWorks users, there's really 3 options that we have. We've got automatic, we have appearance grouping, and we have retain structure. So what these 3 do is automatic basically works on the setup of appearances and parts that we have in SolidWorks. It's not directly analogous to just you get your SolidWorks tree, but you have independent control. Appearance will group everything together, so everything that is the same appearance in SolidWorks will basically become a part in Visualize. Retain structure gives you full control over everything. So initially you would think that retain structure would be the best option because it gives you full control. But the problem with retain structure is that it gives you full control. So it's like on a face-by-face level, and it will really bloat your Visualize project. So unless you really, really need it for some reason, and I haven't found a reason that I would recommend not using retain structure, even though it seems like the one that would give you the most control. I'm going to argue in this presentation that automatic actually gives us the best blend of control and flexibility. So we're gonna talk about that, but the differences here as far as how these work, of course, I can't get these to play. I'm gonna switch back to my other laptop real quick because I think my clicker was actually shorting. The USB thing broke off, so that's not a good sign. Okay, let's see if we can go through this without issue. For Pete's sake. Sorry guys, it's gonna be one of those days, I can tell. So what I'm trying to illustrate here is the difference between the two import options. So we're gonna look at both the appearance and the automatic options, and they work a little bit differently when we import those from SolidWorks into Visualize. And it's important to know the difference between those as far as how they're going to function. Come on. Let me see if I can hook up my mouse. So in automatic mode, basically what happens is it will keep your assembly structure in the sense that if you have multiple appearances that are all the same appearance. So in this case, we have a bunch of, you can kind of see there's kind of mainly black and mainly red, right? So when those come into Visualize through SolidWorks, we'll find that we have finer control over making those changes because automatic will give us the ability to adjust those independently. So if we go back here, can I get anything to work? No, I cannot. Oh, good, they work on my screen. That's helpful. This is frustrating. Okay, so I'll have to just explain it. So what happens when we import, again, from SolidWorks using the automatic method is if you were to take an appearance and drag it onto the model, say we drag it onto one of the in-color plastic body panels here. With automatic, it would give us the ability to take this appearance and apply it just to, say, this rear fender, right? If we, on the flip side, were to use this using the appearance filter or the appearance import method, what that does is it groups everything of the same appearance together into one part. So it makes it very quick to swap things out because everything that is red, you can then switch to yellow. So in this case, if I were to take this yellow appearance, drag this over to this red piece, that would then switch everything that's in that color red to yellow with one drag and drop. Now that sounds pretty cool until you get all the way through your project and realize, shoot, I need this one piece to be a different color or something like that, and then you have to do a bunch of work to try to get yourself back to a point where you can independently control things. So there is a way to switch things on a group level, even with using automatic. So that's going to be my recommendation to you, that you use automatic almost all the time, if not all the time. And from there, make your adjustments either one by one or use the method that I'll show you in a little bit to do that. All right, in the meantime, I'm going to switch computers again and I'm going to restart mine. Okay, so what my process looks like when I'm getting ready to do a rendering is I start off, of course, in SolidWorks, like most of us do, I would assume, and I build the model without any of the appearances on it. So this is an example of a model I built for a rendering contest we had a little while back, and just something that I made up. So I built the model, no appearances are on it, so it is just the default color gray. From there, in SolidWorks, I apply my materials, but again, I mentioned earlier that I do this a little bit differently than most people probably do. So I think most people would go through and they would apply the appearances that they would be using in the rendering setting, and then they import those into Visualize and then just run with those. Most of the time I use the appearances that are built into Visualize. Visualize comes with a full set of appearances that you can use, and some great appearances as well. I usually end up using those. So instead of adding the appearances that I think I'm going to use and then I'm not going to end up using in Visualize anyway, I take a slightly different approach, and I use my appearances more as grouping methods than I do anything. So in this case, I applied some appearances that don't look anything like what it's going to actually turn out to be, but it doesn't matter because I'm not going to use any of those appearances anyway. They're just sort of placeholders for what I'm going to do when I get to Visualize. So, excuse me, I use these as bright a colors or as differently contrasting colors as I can because it's a great visual way to see what it is I've worked on in Visualize. I know this bright pink one. Okay, I need to do that appearance next, right? So I just swap those out when I get to Visualize. So anything that is going to be, or I want to be able to change in one group, I would do as the same color. So usually what I do in this case is, in SolidWorks you have in your appearance pane, you have just like a default color, right, that you can just drag out and it's not any real appearance, it's just a color. If you hold Alt on your keyboard, it'll just automatically pop up the box to start editing it. So I usually do that. I'll just Alt drag the default color on there and I'll just pick an RGB value. And then I'll just take that appearance and apply that RGB value to whatever it is that I want to be grouped together, if you will, as an appearance. The reason why I like doing this in SolidWorks instead of anywhere else is SolidWorks has some great tools for getting things filtered out nicely. So one of the hardest things to get correct in Visualize is actual face applications of appearances, because when Visualize is working with your data, it's not really the CAD data, right? It's just kind of tessellated. So it doesn't have a great reference of what a face is like SolidWorks does. SolidWorks keeps good track of where our faces are. So you can see, for example, in the middle of my little hub there in the middle, there is sort of silver for most of it, and then on the insides of those pockets, I have a different appearance applied. So I knew that I was going to have this whole thing as aluminum, but I also knew that in the middle, I wanted this to have a little bit more reflection than the rest of it. So I wanted kind of a finer surface finish in here. So you can see I actually modeled in some machine marks and things like that. So I wanted those machine marks to reflect off the walls nicely, where I wanted this to be more brushed. So knowing that I was going to do that while I was in SolidWorks, I just took those faces or by features and applied those appearances in there so that I have quick access to that. And then I can just switch that appearance right out and visualize and not have to worry about trying to split off faces and visualize or anything like that. All right, so again, probably a semi-unorthodox way to do things, but I find that it helps quite a bit. So from there, once I get to that process, I then import it using the automatic settings into Visualize, and then that turns into whatever rendering you're working on. All right, so I just end up swapping out those appearances just with drag and drop to whatever appearance I want. And again, that gives me full control over what this appearance is and what that appearance is. I have these hardwares grouped together, and I have, this appearance is set to a different appearance that this is, which is hard to see on the screen. But you've got a lot of control over exactly what it is you're trying to do. Okay? All right, we're going to try this again here. Okay. So another example of why I like to do this, back to the lens that we talked about before. So this is a great reason to have reference images. So this is something that I wouldn't have picked up or thought of if I didn't have an image to look at. But in this image, I noticed that the surface finish of this material on the bottom is pretty much the same as the surface finish of the ring on the top, right? It's got a little bit of a bump map to it. But I noticed that the color of it actually isn't the same. So this piece on the bottom is metal, this piece on the top is plastic. So they're both black, but they're a different shade of black for sure. It's probably hard to see that on the projector, but when you're looking at your reference images, you can pick up those kinds of things, right? So this is a case where I would use my SolidWorks filtering sort of to set up an opportunity where I can switch those pretty easily, because if I apply the same appearance to those in SolidWorks, then especially if I'm using appearance grouping, things get all crunched together and then I've got to try to separate things out. To make matters worse, this is a face appearance on the bottom, which is much more harder to get access to and visualize, right? Have you guys tried to add an appearance just to a face and visualize? It's pretty tricky. So what I did in this case here was to separate things out just like I did before, right? So we can apply to this whole face and this whole face here, again, different colors, and then I can swap those out when I get into Visualize and have very quick and independent control over these. Now what I like about this process, and the reason why I like doing this in SolidWorks, is because it gives me the ability to use what SolidWorks has available to us as far as filters. And none of my videos are going to play. Gosh, this stinks. I know. I was working this morning and then I plugged my clicker in and it shorted the USB and now I can't get anything to work. I can't get my mouse over here. All right, let's see if we can do this. No, we can't do that. Pete's sake. Sorry, guys. Yeah. Take all the help I get. It was working when I plugged it in. Oh, you think it's presenter mode? You are the man. Look at this. Tech support for tech support. Love it. All right, so let's go back. What did you switch?
I disabled graphic support.
Okay. All right. Back on track. Help from the audience. So again, in separating these things out, the reason why I like to do this in SolidWorks is because SolidWorks has that filter that allows us to apply to whatever it is we want to apply to very quickly, right? You've got faces, you've got bodies, we have full control over that. So if we were to drag an appearance and I want it on that face, right, we get the filter that pops up and then I have fine control over that. We don't have the ability to do that in Visualize or any other software. So we can apply it at like a part level, a body level, a feature level, a face level, and we have very quick control to be able to kind of pinpoint exactly where we want those appearances to land. So SolidWorks, I think, is by far the quickest way to get those appearances in. And then we have this nice like hierarchy view of exactly where all of our appearances are going. So we can keep track of things really quickly and easily in SolidWorks, and we can also apply them very quickly and easily. And that lets us get into Visualize and swap things out really exactly where we need those appearances to go. All right, does that make sense after I had to stop 1,500 times there? Okay, cool. So as far as appearances actually go, I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to go through the actual picks and clicks specifically with appearances because we could spend the entire session just on appearances. Every appearance model that you'll find in Visualize has a different set of controls. So those set of controls are unique to the type of appearance that you are using. So if you just drag one out of the library, you'll see that you have different options for what you can do with it. However, the mindset of what I'm looking to change across all of the appearances is basically the same. So if you're looking to make some changes to an appearance, these are the three things that I usually am looking to do first off. So the color is the obvious one that you can swap pretty quickly and easily. Pretty much every appearance has a color block right at the top, right? So if you click on the little color block, you can use the little color wheel. One of the cool things that Visualize has built in, and I didn't put a screenshot of it in here, but I should have. But if you choose a different color for your appearance, it has a little pipette color picker. That little pipette color picker works across windows. So you can have your company website open on one monitor and your Visualize open on the other. You can choose a color, hit the little pipette, and you can color reference from your company's website. So you have pretty good flexibility as far as where those colors are coming from, obviously RGB values or whatever else you want to use. But you can mess with those in pretty much every appearance. The roughness, that is a texture map. So you'll see a section in there for texture. This is an older screenshot, so it's up here now in the interface. But the texture has 4 maps, and I'll just mention these really quickly because I'm probably running behind schedule already. But we have color, specular, alpha, and bump. What those textures do, and those can all be synced together if you want to, what those do is those will wrap over the model. The color map, that's like you can think of that basically like a decal. So if you have like a surface finish, like that picture of a surface finish that you got on Google or something, you can wrap that over it. The specular map, that will bump or cut the highlights. I really only use that for things that are like scratched or worn, like if you wanted to show something where somebody's like fingers had worn on it and it's kind of dull there or something like that, you can make like a hazy specular map for that purpose. An alpha map, what that will do is it uses the alpha channel to basically punch holes. So if you think of like something that's a mesh or a chain link or something like that, you can make a black and white image that would punch holes in the appearance. And the bump map is the one that you would use most often for texturing. The bump map is what actually gives you that kind of surface finish. So on the lens before, there was kind of a textured, like grippy surface on that. That would be a bump map. So you would get a noise map or make a noise map or download one from the web. You would double click in that box and load that in. And then you have control over how deep it's actually going to look like it's lit. Okay. So different controls across the board, but the things that I'm looking to change are always roughly the same. Okay, so, sorry. When we're looking to group appearances together, one thing that I use quite a bit is copy and paste appearance. The reason why I copy and paste appearance quite a bit is because I want those appearances to be exactly the same. That way they get grouped in Visualize. So if I'm using my little RGB method that I use, if I have one that's really, really close to another one, it looks like it's the same, but it's not, then I don't have the ability to kind of group those together and visualize. So I want to make sure they're exactly the same RGB value. I'm not a nitpicky person. I don't like going through and checking 3 values and copy and pasting. So I just take the appearance itself and copy and paste it onto the next piece that I want to group together. So basically I apply a 1, I make it some weird oddball color, and then I just copy and paste it to all of the things that I want it to copy and paste to. So we can copy and paste appearances in both SolidWorks and Visualize. In SolidWorks, to copy an appearance, just use Control-Shift-C, so just like Control-C, but use Shift. And when you paste the appearance, Control-Shift-V, you'll get the selection filter again, which is cool. So you can apply it to maybe a whole body or to a face again. So you don't have to apply it to the same thing that it was applied to. It's just taking that appearance and putting it onto whatever you want. So drag one on and then Control-C and Control-Shift-C and Control-Shift-V around your model, and you've got it set up and grouped together. Now, if you're going to do that in Visualize, if you've already brought them in and you realize you want to match some appearances, you can do that as well. The shortcut is different. So it's Shift and left and right click. So Shift and left click to select the appearance, Shift and right click to paste it. Now you'll notice we get slightly different behavior here. So when I pasted it in SolidWorks, I got just the 0, right? When I paste it in Visualize, both the 9 and the 0 go together. That's because that appearance has been grouped already when it came in and was imported. So that's a good and bad thing. You just have to be aware of that.
So is that brought in, not using the automatic?
That was using automatic. So if that was brought in using appearance, anything else in the model that was that color would also go. We're kind of getting a truncated view here, but anything that was that yellow across the entire model would be. In this case, that's just giving that text was one piece.
Yellow above is changing as well.
It is changing above, yeah. That's one piece in there. But if any other components were, because that's like one surface body in there. But yeah. Your thought process is correct. Okay, so here's the little trick that I mentioned earlier, and this is really the reason why I use automatic all the time and I never use appearance import options anymore. Brian Hillner taught me this trick a while back, and I was just like, that finishes this off for me. So again, what this allows us to do, bring things in and have full control over the individual components as applying our appearances. But if we want to swap everything that's one color, you can do that. So the way that this works is, again, this is automatic, so we see independent control over those. And I just drop it in the graphics area, and you can see that it adds it to the project. So all we need to do is copy that appearance and right click, and instead of paste it, say assign. And if you assign that appearance, anything that was the red appearance gets assigned to the copied appearance. So rather than having to do 1 by 1 by 1 by 1, you have the control that you could do 1 by 1 if you want to, but you can also replace all of them if you need to. So that particular method is the reason why I haven't used appearance grouping since I learned that. Because you have full control with appearance to do individually, as you can see, or you can just kind of completely replace everything. All right, so it's a little bit hidden, but just copy, right click, assign appearance, and that will just wipe everything. Cool. Okay, lights. How are we doing on time here? 11:11, okay. This section is interesting. This section, I think, is the most important section, and also probably the section that people struggle with the most. Not saying that I'm any professional at lighting by any means. It's probably the most difficult part of this, but I also think it's the most important and probably the most easily improved. So the lighting section here, I break down into 2 categories. So there's basically 2 ways that you can go about lighting your rendering. One is you can just use one of the preloaded HDR environments that comes with Visualize. Visualize comes with a ton of HDRs that you can drag in and use. That's what most people do, and that is perfectly sufficient sometimes. The second approach is you can use some kind of enhanced lighting environment, and there's three things that we'll talk about in that category. But the reason why this makes such a difference is kind of illustrated here. So this example, I found an image that looked like this on Pinterest, and I just kind of recreated it real quick just to play with some things. This video is blending back and forth between two renderings with the exact same appearance. The only thing that is different in this is the HDR environment that's surrounding it. And I find that a lot of people will try Visualize for the first time or for a handful of times. They take their SolidWorks model, they import it, they hit render, and they say, it doesn't really look that good. Or I hear a lot, I got better results out of PhotoView 360. And most of the time, it's because of this, right? If we look at that, those renderings, let's just look at them side by side, it almost doesn't even look like the same appearance. Right, they're both copper appearance, but on the right-hand side, it almost just kind of looks weird and flat and pink, where it looks more like copper on the one on the left. So again, the lighting and the way things reflect off of the model makes a massive difference on the way that things look. I sort of intentionally found an environment that was sort of flat, so it might not look that bad every time you bring it into Visualize, by default, but I find that most of the time that when people find that they're not getting great results, it's probably because of lighting. So let's talk about what our options are here. So again, we can use the preloaded HDRs that are built in. There are some things that we can do to try to work with those environments. There are some environments that I use in there on a pretty regular basis. But we can also use some enhanced lighting environments. So if we're going to enhance, we can either take a stock HDR that's in there and add some lights to it. That's going to require Visualize Professional to do that. So Visualize Professional has the ability to add extra lights in there, so like area lights. If you don't have Visualize Professional, you can get a similar effect by putting in geometry and then applying an emissive appearance to that geometry, so essentially making a light. We'll take a look at. And then the other option is to use an add-in for Visualize, something like HDR Light Studio, which will allow you to actually build an environment that's specific for what you need. All right, so let's take a look at this first option here, and that's just to use the default scenes that are provided with Visualize, with your seat of Visualize. I have the method that I call this is whip, flip, and strip. So if you are using a built-in environment, you take an environment out of the library, you say this one looks good, whip it into your model, flip it, so rotate the environment around, see how the lighting changes as you rotate that environment around. If you don't like it, strip it back out. Whip, flip, and strip. So that process looks something like this, pretty much straightforward, right? Drag it in from the environment, rotate, see how that changes the lighting, say, no, it didn't really like any angle of that, drag it back out and try something else. So basically it's trial and error as far as what you're looking for. Now the more you do this, the more you'll be able to zero in on which HDR environments you like for whatever purposes, so it's not totally just random guessing. You'll figure that out as far as how much contrast they have in them and all of that. You'll probably zero in on some favorites. But for the most part, it's just kind of guess and check, see what looks good, right? So the three controls, again, that I use when I'm doing this method is bring the appearance or the environment in, and then I adjust the brightness, the gamma, and the rotation. So spin things around until I get the lighting to look as best as I think it can, right? So as balanced as I can. And then I'll adjust the brightness up or down, and I'll adjust the gamma up or down. The brightness is pretty self-explanatory, right? The gamma is less self-explanatory. Does anyone have a good explanation of gamma? I don't. The way that I think about it is contrast. It isn't contrast, but that's kind of how I think about it in my head. So I have video, but basically what I use this for is a de-blend. I find a lot of times the renderings just kind of lack a little bit of contrast. So if you adjust the gamma, which has something to do with the total amount of light and how it's distributed, and it's beyond me, but you can see by adjusting that slider, the lighting gets much more harsh when you drop the gamma down. It gets much more flat and balanced when you drop the gamma up. So usually what I do is I pull the gamma down just a hair, like not a whole lot. You can see you can really easily overdo it, but maybe like 0.75 or something like that, just to kind of add like a little bit of extra punch, especially if you're not going to do any post-processing. So just a little pro tip there. Those are the three things that I usually adjust if I'm going to use a built-in environment. Okay. So if you want to go beyond a built-in environment, you can't find anything that really looks all that good. Again, we've got three options. So the first of those options is to use a built-in environment and then use a light. So what does that look like? Well, in Visualize Pro, again, you can right-click right in your environment area and you can just say New Light. So this is a really nice, easy, direct way to get access to augmented lighting. You can choose what type of light you want to use from a drop-down. I usually use some kind of directional light of some sort. And one thing that I like to do is I just zero out its position. So they come in sort of an estimated area. I just drop it right to the middle of my model so I can see where it is, and then I stretch it out from there. So the cool thing with these lights is they're all adjustable by the manipulation tools. So you can just click right on the light, click right on the focus point, and you can just start moving them around with the object manipulation tools that you find at the top of your screen. So very intuitive, pretty easy to use, pretty easy to add. Obviously the downside to this is that you need Visualize Professional to do that. Not that that's a downside, because I think you should all get Pro. It's a great deal, it's a great product. But if you don't have it, you can't do this currently. So you can see with this process, we're getting a really sharp hotspot there with that light being right there, but we can position that around to get it balanced out to where we want it. And then the light itself has brightness and color controls that we can adjust from there. So whatever temperature, Kelvin you want the light to be, and however bright you want it to be. And now we have an HDR that's been augmented with an additional light that we've added in Visualize. Okay. Now again, if you don't have Visualize Professional, and I should add that in Visualize Professional, they also added the ability to click where you want the light to go, which is really cool. We'll see that type of functionality when we look at HDR Light Studio. But if you don't have Visualize Professional, you can sort of get a similar effect, as I mentioned, by just kind of building a light yourself. So that process is actually fairly similar. Your controls are just in different places. So this time in the model tree, we're creating an actual primitive. So Visualize does have a bunch of shapes that are in there. They usually don't get used for a whole lot because we're doing all of our modeling in other modeling programs, SolidWorks probably for most of you. But you can see in this case, we can add in a plane, or you can make a torus for a ring light or a sphere. All right, so you can add in a basic piece of geometry, and what we'll do is we'll add an emissive appearance to it that will then shine onto the rest of our model. Now one tip here, just like I did with the light, I zeroed the light out. If you use the pivot point and set the pivot point back to the environment, that will put your controller down at the bottom, and then you can just sort of swivel your light around the model, which is pretty helpful. So once we add an emissive appearance to it, we'll need to switch ourselves into accurate rendering mode, because accurate rendering mode is the only one that will allow emissive appearances to impact other models. So once you're in accurate rendering mode, you'll see it start to come up. So this was on my laptop when I recorded this. I should have redone it on my desktop, but so you can see a small highlight there. Now the only real difference between these methods is where you'll be adjusting things. So the light has its own section in the environments. This is now just an appearance. So you would need to go into the appearance options if you want to change the brightness of that. But it is an emissive appearance, so it does have an actual brightness slider. So you can get a pretty similar effect to adding in lights if you don't have Visualize Pro. by just sort of building your own. It's a little bit more work, but you can get there. And you do have to render in accurate mode. That is one downside. Okay. The last option is HDR Light Studio. HDR Light Studio is awesome. This is an add-in that was actually originally designed with what used to be the Visualize product. So it works hand in hand with Visualize. And what this allows us to do is build an HDR environment from scratch. So you can see, just like adding in a light, you can just right-click in your environment area when you have the add-in, and you can start a new HDR Light Studio project. Excuse me. That HDR Light Studio opens in its own pane. You can put it off on its other window. And at the top there, this is the actual HDR map that you're building. So an HDR is just a spherical image map that wraps around our model. We're actually building this from scratch and seeing the results of it in real time in Visualize. So we can buy HDR environments or something like that, but this software allows us to build a specific one for our purposes. Now, the coolest thing is that it goes completely hand in hand. So I just dragged in a light. I clicked on my model and I said, I want this shape light to light my model right there. So I added it to the HDR environment. I clicked saying, I want the highlight to show up here. And then I'll just manipulate the size and shape and brightness of the light in HDR Light Studio, which will allow me to build out that, that HDR scene that we're working with, right? So we have rotation controls, we have light size controls. And every change that I make, we're seeing show up and re-render in Visualize in real time, which is just the coolest thing ever. All right, so all these presets come with HDR Light Studio. Excuse me, sorry. So this is definitely the fastest way to get your lighting the way that you want it. I actually use HDR Light Studio on a lot of the things that I do because it's just so much quicker to build it from scratch. You can put images in the background, so if you want specific reflections and all of that kind of thing, you can do that as well. But it's really just point and click as far as I want some light here, I don't want light here. Very cool. One of the things that I really like with HDR Light Studio is it builds up, just like Photoshop, layers of lights, and you can then go through and say, I want to toggle on only this light, or I want to toggle this light off. This is really nice for gaining an understanding of what lighting does, because if you solo a light, you can see exclusively what that one light is doing to the lighting, the overall lighting scheme, and you can make fine tweaks and adjustments to that you wouldn't be able to really comprehend without seeing it outside of the whole lighting environment. So it definitely gives you a better understanding of how things are working, which is kind of cool. So that was an example of Visualize with HDR Light Studio. It's almost Valentine's Day, so match made in heaven. Most of the information that I just showed there is actually in one of my videos. So if you want to see the whole process, unfortunately, obviously we can't show the whole thing. You can grab that. It was in a video that I did a little while back. Okay, cameras. This is another one that gets very confusing. Most people who are using Visualize are not photographers. So what I want to do is kind of run through what some of the critical camera settings are, because there are a lot in there. So we'll break this down into really 3 important pieces of information as far as what a camera does for us. So where the camera is, its actual position, its focal length, and its aperture settings. All right, so the reason why this gets confusing is because a professional photographer has a lot of things going on, right? So they're trying to manage essentially how much light comes into their camera, and they're doing that through a handful of different means. So a camera has an aperture, which is basically an adjustable hole in the front of it, adjustable size hole. They have a shutter which opens and closes at different speeds, and then they have a sensor that adjusts to light differently. That's essentially the ISO. So they need to be able to use these three things in combination to get the right amount of light in for the right purposes to get an image to happen correctly. Fortunately for us, we don't have to do quite as much of a balancing act as a normal photographer would have to do, because we don't have to worry so much about the actual amount of light coming in. We don't have, an environment to work with. The system is adjusting for the amount of light. We can actually crank our lights up and down, right? So we have a huge advantage over an actual photographer in that sense. So basically this whole ISO section is not really important to us, right? That's just a brightness scaling factor, if you want to think of it that way. These other two, however, get used for creative effect. ISO doesn't really get used for creative effect. That's just adjusting how much light the camera's taking in. Aperture and shutter speed, however, can be used for creative effect, and we'll see how that works in a second. So those two are important for us to know. So again, what the aperture actually is just an adjustable size hole in the front of the camera. So it's in the lens itself. And that lets in light, and it also lets in light in a specific way. So the way that an aperture works is a little tough to see on the screen here, but you can see the angle of how the light hits the sensor is very different depending on the size of the actual hole. So there's more light coming in with a larger size aperture, but it's also coming in at a much steeper angle. And that creates a pretty interesting effect for us when we're taking images. You can see on the smaller aperture, less light is coming in, but again, we don't have to worry about that, but it's also coming in at a much more shallow angle when it hits the sensor. So what that does for us as a photographer and what we can make use of in our rendering software is that we can sort of isolate objects in a very natural way. So we can put things in context, but we can draw the viewer's eyes to something in particular by controlling what's actually in focus. So a larger physical size aperture has more depth of field in it, what we call depth of field. So you can see in this case here, we have a larger physical aperture, which, because we're humans and we make everything confusing, is a lower number ratio on a camera, will give us less in focus than a higher number aperture or a smaller physical aperture would. So you can see here we've got these little eggs are in focus and pretty much nothing else is. Everything else just kind of falls out of focus. Or on the one on the right-hand side, everything is in focus. So this is a nice way to, again, put things in context. Sometimes we want to see things in their environment. It makes things feel more realistic and natural, but you want the viewer to see something specific, right? So we can build in some depth of field that gives them the sense that the product's where it's supposed to be, but also allows them to lock onto what you want them to lock onto. And we can do that through our use of aperture. So again, the smaller the aperture value, that f-stop ratio, will give you more out of focus, essentially. All right, so this is a little tough to see. I should have done a better example of this, but this is just an animation running through different aperture values. You wouldn't actually be able to do this on an actual camera because the amount of light would be changing a lot, but in rendering we can do that. So you can see the focal point is up here somewhere, and the tail section sort of falls in and out of focus. All right. The next thing that we need to know is the focal length of the camera. On a physical camera, the focal length is the actual lens. So that's the lens that you're using. Some lenses are adjustable, like a zoom lens has an adjustable focal length. Some of them are prime lenses, just like a single focal length. But if you're looking for some kind of reference as far as what these are, you'll see that value in the slider. A wide angle lens is somewhere between 8 and 20 millimeters, something like that. Mid-range prime lenses are like 30 to 80s, somewhere around there. And then telephotos are like 100 millimeters and up. So why does this even matter? because we don't have to physically move around, right? Normally, people think you would use a zoom lens because you can't physically get to the thing that you want to see. That's not totally the whole reason why you would use a different lens. You actually get a pretty significantly different effect and a different look of the image by using different lenses. Yes, exactly. So there is going to be more what they call compression in a telephoto lens than you would get in a wider angle lens. Right, so these lenses do have an impact. Fortunately, we don't have to carry these around like this guy. Right, we're in rendering software, we can just move around. It doesn't matter what we have. That thing can't even be that heavy. He's just showing off his guns. It's probably foam. So this is the effect that I'm talking about. This is kind of an interesting animation. This is also something that's very difficult to get on an actual camera because you'd be actually swapping lenses. But this would be a sweep from a wide angle lens to a telephoto lens. And you can see it looks very unnatural because we can't really do this well with a real camera. But you can see that the image gets more compressed as it zooms out. So I'm zooming in and I'm moving the camera at the same time, basically, to get this effect. You've probably seen this effect. It's called the Jaws effect in movies, where they'll like zoom and move the camera at the same time, so the subject stays in the same framing, but they just get like weirdly warped. So you can use the focal length to creative effect if you want a little bit more of an aggressive kind of up close image. A wider angle lens might make more sense, right? If you're looking for something that's more flat, ortho view, doesn't have a lot of perspective in it, then a zoom lens would make better sense. For that matter, you can turn off perspective altogether. You can just do ortho if you want, but usually when we're rendering, we want some sense of realism, so you want some perspective in there. But the lower the focal length, the more perspective you're going to get. It will also look further away, so you're going to have to move your camera up a little bit too. So this effect can get overdone too. You can see when it gets towards the end, it gets like really overly distorted. But the nice thing with these camera skills is once you kind of get the hang of these, this is a really nice transition into Visualize Professional. So a lot of people want to go from stills into rendering animations and things like that. Camera movements are a great way to transition into animation, even if you don't know a whole lot about animating. You may have seen this video that I did a little while ago. All it is just camera movements. I didn't do any crazy animation except for that, After Effects stuff, but all of that is just moving the camera around the model. So being able to manipulate and work with your cameras is a great technique. So a little focus pull there, the camera didn't move, but the depth of field did. So you can just kind of animate a lot of those little things and make a pretty dynamic video with not really a whole lot of effort or too much involved. Right? So that particular skill translates nicely into Visualize Pro. I did do a camera session. This is actually kind of an older video, but I think it still holds up. I watched some of it the other day. I forgot that I had even done it. And actually, some of the slides that I showed originally came from that. So if you're looking for more information and some different camera moves that you can apply, you can check out that video. How are we doing time-wise? Okay. So the next section, once we get things set up, is how do we actually get it out of Visualize? And to get things out of Visualize, there's, again, 3 things that we mostly need to be aware of. What file format do we want to use? What resolution do we want to use? And how many passes do we want to use to get this spit out? This is a really critical step because all of the work that we've just done can be ruined right here. So we want to be very intentional about what settings we choose. And unfortunately, this can get a little overwhelming too. Like, what the heck do we need to set all these to get a good image, right? Because these settings can make the difference between something that looks like this and something that looks like this. So we want to be very careful about what we're choosing when we're spitting this out of Visualize. So when you go into the render options, there are a string of different options across the top. All of these are for different purposes. So you've got a snapshot here, which will just grab what's rendering on your screen currently. The render options, which is the one that we're going to talk about right now, has all of the rendering options for still frames going out. Animation, this gives you all the controls for things like what we just saw to spit those out. We have turntable options, which is a quick shortcut option for just having things spin as an animation. Again, that would be a pro option as well. And then a solar study. So those are pro options. We're just going to talk about the still frame rendering options here. All of that information that we're going to talk about carries over into the animation stuff as well. So if we break this down a little bit, this output settings section here, this section at the top is what I'm showing here. And what we need to know in this section is what image format do we want to use. So obviously we put in a name for our rendering and all of that, but this guy is kind of the critical one, the image format here. So we can choose from a variety of different image formats when we spit these out. Usually people are choosing between something like a JPEG, a PNG, or a TIFF file, but there might be a reason why you'd want to use one or the other. The main reason, I think, is this little guy right here, this include alpha. This include alpha is only supported by certain image formats. So a JPEG image, for example, doesn't support an alpha channel. And an alpha channel allows you to store transparency right into the image itself. So if you stored something that you wanted to be transparent in a JPEG, it would just be white. So the problem with that is if you want to use that image on top of something else, you've got to go in and do a bunch of heavy editing to try to get that fixed. So an old screenshot here, but I kept it because we had a website at one point. Our website looked like this, and it had this weird kind of like carbon fiber-ish looking texture there, right? If I wanted to make a rendering that went on our website and I used a JPEG, it's not going to work very well because I've got all this white space that I've then got to go into Photoshop or something and try to edit out, and then I got to mess with, in this case I didn't have any shadows here, but if I wanted a shadow down there, then I have to try to carefully pick around my shadow and blend that all out, and it's a nightmare. Where if we used, instead of a JPEG, we used a PNG, and we checked that option for alpha, that alpha channel is the transparency. So if we use an image format that supports it and we use the option to do that, it will just take the background out for us and it will only render our product, and then we don't have to do any of that heavy editing. So you do want to be careful about what image format you're using if you need any specifics there. Okay. Next down is resolution. This one gets confusing for a lot of people as far as what they actually need. My approach is to render your image at the biggest size you think you might possibly need, because it's always way easier to shrink an image than it is to enlarge it. If you enlarge an image that's too small, you get all sorts of kind of pixelation and things like that. I'm sure you've all downloaded something from Google and you try to put it in a presentation and you blow it up and it looks ridiculous, right? So you can shrink things a lot easier than you can grow them. There are softwares out there that have algorithms and things like that to make things larger and enhance them, but you're way better off to just render things at the size that you need them. But what is that size? Well, unfortunately, I can't really tell you what that needs to be. But it really depends on what the purpose of the image is going to be. If it's going on the web, it can usually be significantly lower resolution than if it's going in print. My rule of thumb for print is usually things are printed at around 300 dpi. So if there are 300 dots per inch, you need that many times 300 to make it however many inches you need it to be. If it's going on a screen, then usually you can use some more standard references, 1920 by 1080 or 1280, or usually a screen resolution. If you're working with your marketing department, best thing you can do is just call them up and say, hey, I'm trying to make this image for our website. What size do you need me to make it? And they can usually tell you. So getting that set up is just a matter of where the image is going to need to be used, right? If it's going to need to be on a poster that's going into one of your exhibits or something like that, it's going to need to be much larger than if it's going out on a postcard to your customers. Resolution underneath that gets a little confusing because the resolution actually doesn't really mean that much. The actual pixel size is what's driving the size of the image. I set this to 300 on mine and I just leave it. The only thing that it does is just how Photoshop reads the file in the end. It still makes the same size image no matter what. So it's not super critical that you need to know that. Okay, so once you get the resolution set, we just need to know the quality settings. Quality settings work just the same as they do when you're actually rendering in the software. So across the top, you've got your regular preview mode. Sorry, this is an old screenshot too. These little icons look different now, but you've got your preview mode, your fast mode, and your quality mode. So whatever level there. As far as what that does for you between fast rendering mode and accurate rendering mode, generally it's just a number of passes. So the number of passes you can set underneath here is basically how long Visualize works on the image. So it's just kind of running refinement passes. What that does is reduces the noise in the image. So the more passes you run, the less noise you'll get in there. So it's usually a matter of just finding that sweet spot of how quick can I do it and how little noise can I get away with, right? If you are using that lighting method that I use, the non-professional lighting method, where you're using an actual physical object to shine on something, just remember in those cases you would have to use accurate rendering mode, otherwise you won't see that effect. But for the most part, it's usually just shadow quality and noise differences between accurate. I usually use accurate mode and then render something in the thousands. Do be aware that newer versions of Visualize also have the denoiser built in, so they claim a 10x reduction in noise. So you could use 10 times less number of passes to get the same amount of noise because of their built-in augmented reality, which is pretty cool. So in the thousands usually. And outside of that, we just have to choose where it goes. So we can start the render there. Again, if you're using Visualize Professional, you have the option to use the queue as well, which is nice. So you can stack a bunch of renderings up and then render them all over the weekend. Okay. Oh yeah, so another video I did relatively recently was this one. This has a bunch more information on how resolution and aspect ratio and things like that work. If you want to check that one out, that has some good info in there. Mm-hmm.
When you click include alpha, does the background change so like in Photoshop, changes to checkers?
Not in Visualize. You'll still see the background there because that happens when you hit the output, so it actually doesn't happen until after what you're seeing on the screen. So you would choose that when you get everything set up and then you just say, I don't want the background. But if you were to open it in Photoshop, if you have that transparency setting, then you'll see it. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great option. That saves an enormous amount of time.
So for your example of the settings, maybe for that camera lens,
Mm-hmm.
how long would that rendering take?
The video one you were talking about or the still frame? It depends on the resolution and the number of passes. So the higher the resolution, the longer it takes. The higher number of passes, the longer it takes. And it's also very dependent on what your hardware is. So for example, on this machine versus my laptop, this machine has a P2000 in it. My desktop at work has a RTX 4000. The RTX 4000 is over 5 times faster than this. So it really depends on what your settings are. An image like that on my desktop would be 30 seconds. So yeah, it just kind of depends. The RTX, by the way, is an awesome card. It's around $800-900, and it's fantastic. I love it.
That is not a quad-core RTX.
Yeah,
Correct.
yeah, it's an NVIDIA.
So quad-core RTX, not even a few months, right?
Do they have 2 different versions of it?
Yeah, I think they still technically quadro.
I think it's listed under the Quadro family.
You can use multiple cards too,
You can use multiple cards, yes.
if you can convince your boss.
Yeah,
Jesse did not.
I did not. Okay. So back to the settings here. So again, the process I follow is basically the same every time I go through a rendering, right? So kind of figure out where you're going, apply your appearances. I use that kind of strategic approach to applying those appearances. Bring that all into Visualize. Again, I use the automatic option to do that. Set up your scenes and lighting from within there. Set the camera settings last, and then choose my output settings. Cool. I think that's all I have for you. Don't forget to take the surveys. They're only 3 questions. Rachel did an awesome job with those this year. If you want to hit me on LinkedIn or social, we have a ton of videos on Visualize. But other than that, thank you guys for coming. Let me know if you have any questions.